On this episode, we'll discuss how to clarify your church's identity and mission. Well, hey there, and welcome to another episode of the Church Leadership Lab podcast, the show that is dedicated to inspiring leaders and empowering healthy churches. We're your hosts, Kendall Connor and Jessica Moore. We're so happy to be with you today. Hey, how are you today, Jess?
I'm doing good. How are you, Kendall?
Doing really well. I'm not going to lie to you. I'm excited about today's episode. I know it's going to be a good one.
Yeah, I am too. I feel like clarity is something that we don't talk about enough. And so this will be super helpful.
Yes. And, mission and figuring out, exactly who your church is. I know that's going to be just really helpful for a lot of these ministries that we get to speak into. And something that's pretty special is that we have our guest today is a returning guest to our podcast. This is going to be the second time that he's been able to speak into our church, our audience of church leaders. And so I think last time, I don't know that I think you may have been traveling or something the last time that we had
Yeah.
him on the show. So this may be the first time that you've had the opportunity to hear from our today's guest. But
Yep.
I would encourage everyone to go back. If you have not listened to the previous episode that we have with today's guest, definitely go back. It is the one and only Tyler Harden. And if you have not connected with him before, I want to give you a little bit of a background on him so that you're up to speed. He is a church growth consultant, and he's the co-founder of Firm Foundations Marketing. And he has helped hundreds of churches that are plateaued to really find their focus so that they can break through those growth barriers. I don't know about you, but that's a near and dear thing to my heart. Being
Hmm.
able to help these churches grow. He combines marketing with that ministry experience, equipping church leaders to really use kind of a research-backed approach so that they can reach more of the right people with the methods that they're using in their communities. And so today we're going to get to discuss, as we said, the church's identity and their mission and really bringing clarity to that. And so it's going to be a good one, Jess.
I'm excited too.
Before we jump in, I just want to encourage everyone. You probably already know what I'm going to say, Jess. We want to everyone to hit that follow button, everyone who's listening, because it makes such a big difference. We put out so many resources, and we want to make sure that all of our listeners today are not missing anything. And that is the best way to make sure that you stay in the loop as we continue to release all these conversations and all these resources. That's the best way to make sure that you don't miss a thing. So without further ado, I want to jump into our conversation today. Hi, Tyler. How are you? Thank you for being with us.
Hey, absolutely. Thanks for having me back again, Kendall and Jess. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you. Glad you're here.
Thank you.
What I love is that, Tyler, you're not too far away from. I'm in North Carolina, and you're just a little bit north of me, right?
Yeah. I'm in the southern part of Virginia, in Roanoke.
And I actually grew up in Virginia, and so I love that. It's not, I guess, not too surprising these days that we are able to connect with folks all over the place. But I always love when we get to connect with someone that's not too far away.
Yeah. Likewise.
All right, it was one of the first questions that we always like to ask everyone who comes on the show is what's something, we read the public bio, but what's something that doesn't make that public bio that all your family and friends would know about you? And Tyler, since you've been on the show before, you'll have to give a different answer this time around.
Yeah. So I actually went back to my previous episode, which was episode 111, to listen to make sure I came up with something different this time around. So, so I was actually a walk-on on an NCAA Division I track and field team. I walked on
Wow.
as a discus thrower, and then they were like, actually, you know what? We need some hammer throwers. So an event that I had never done before, got to start for the first time in college. So I had a lot of fun. It was a great several years being able to do that sport.
That's awesome.
Yeah, and that's probably got to be a first. I think that we've heard that on our show. That's pretty impressive.
How are your shoulders now as an adult?
My shoulders are not bad. However, so I also did the weight throw in indoor track, which I think is 35 pounds, which the
Wow.
movement is the thing that they always tell you not to do, right? Like don't bend and twist and all that kind of stuff. So
Yeah.
it's like you're twisting down and yanking this big heavy thing. So I saw the chiropractor a few times in college.
Yeah, I bet. Oh my gosh.
Yeah, yeah.
That's wild. Yeah, definitely a first.
Yeah, yeah, that's pretty impressive though, and just the nerd side of me, I'm just imagining Thor's hammer in this moment. I'm just thinking like,
Mhm. Mhm.
oh, well, that's pretty cool, Tyler. I know today we get the chance to talk about identity and mission for these churches, and I know that you have worked with churches all over the country, right? I'm just kind of curious. I want to jump straight into this content today. What initially drew you to helping churches with something like this, to really discovering and strengthening an identity for churches?
Yeah, so I mean, what I've really seen with working with a whole variety of churches, different denominational backgrounds, different parts of the country, from church plants to mega churches, is so many times they are not clear in their identity. They just don't know how to communicate that and
Mm,
what that looks like practically, how that saturates their communication
yeah.
and how they engage people and
Mm,
what their ministries look like. And, especially for established churches, maybe how they started was really clear, but over time, over leadership transitions and those kinds of
Mm,
things, it has gotten lost and blurred and
yeah.
they've never paused to become more intentional. And so for me, we're called firm foundations marketing because that foundational element is so critical. Like, it doesn't matter if you have
yeah,
a flashy website or you're running some Facebook ads if nobody
Mm,
knows who you are or what you're all about. And sometimes the people sitting in your pews don't even know that answer.
right.
And so for me, it's the low hanging fruit that creates the highest sort of return on your energy for getting
Mm,
clear and getting right because you don't want to sound like any other church. You don't want to have people coming to visit your church and just wondering what are they all about, right? Like that's a lot of times why we see people that come to a church as a guest and they don't return. It's not because you did anything wrong, you just weren't clear on who you were, so they couldn't say, "Hey, that's the church that I've been looking
mm.
for."
mm. Yeah, that's good.
I mean, you bring up a good point, and I think about it for my own church, right? It is important to be able to clearly communicate. Would the people in your pews, in the seats, be able to say what your church is about? Or I tell you, what's an even more scary thing to think about is I wonder, like, if you think about how the people who are in your church, how would they describe your church and what it's all about, right? And that kind of gets you thinking about that identity, right?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. We actually so I was this weekend I was doing a consultation with an African church plant in Maryland actually. So they're all first and second generation Africans here in America.
Wow,
So we had people from Togo and Nigeria and Ghana. It was
wow,
awesome. I loved it. But
Amazing.
one of the first things we did in our workshop was I had each leadership person in that workshop write down in a sentence describe your church to me, and everybody said something completely different. And 2
wow,
specifically mentioned, we're an African church plant, but nobody else did. And it was like and I know that was the whole reason the church was planted was to reach those
Right.
African immigrants that had a unique
wow.
life experience, had turned away from the church. And so, like, I knew the backstory, but not one of them, including the pastor, communicated that in a way that was clear and consistent. So it creates this contrast for folks as you read it, and you're like, "Oh, we're all saying
Yes.
something different." And it's not wrong, but what are, like, the big things that we need to make sure we nail, especially as leaderships?
Yeah, it's interesting that you gave that example. It's that example is so straightforward and simple, right? It
Yeah,
doesn't have to be this like
Yes.
niche, fun sounding slogan, although it might be, but
yeah,
also it may just be as simple as like, this is what we're here to do,
Mm,
right? And
yes.
that's extremely powerful in its own way. For this particular church, it is super targeted. And so
Yes.
if they can be clear with that, the people that want to identify with that
yeah.
will know exactly what to do, where to go, how they connect. So I think that's a good call out. I mean,
Yes.
it doesn't have to be fancy. It can just be like
Yeah.
point blank. What are we here to do? I love that.
Yeah, exactly.
It is encouraging too because it's a good reminder. There are a lot of churches, and even in every community, right? I think about there are churches that are just down the street from each other, but God has called all of us. A while it is a similar. We're all called to the Great Commission. We're all called to reach people for Jesus. There are different flavors, there are different styles, and different callings, right? And not every church can be everything to everyone in that community.
Yeah.
And so,
Mm,
I think this just speaks to that. I'm kind of curious, Tyler. What are what are the common challenges that come with figuring out that identity, figuring out that mission that you're really seeing,
Yeah,
churches
yeah.
struggle
So I
with?
actually had just written the timing of this podcast is perfect. I had just written
Mhm.
a article for Lifeway Research, which was published just 2 days ago, actually,
Wow.
where I covered some of this. So I talked about 5 different types of disconnects that are super common that I see across working with a variety of churches. So those are the entrenched church, the kind of like stuck in our ways, way we've always done it,
Mm,
folks. The aging church, which sometimes those two go hand in hand, but not always. So you're significantly older than the surrounding community,
Mm,
and maybe not able to effectively reach the next generation. The cultural island, so maybe there's some misalignment with what your church looks like or how they act versus the surrounding community. We see that sometimes when the community around the church has changed faster than the church itself has. Um, Country club church is another one, which is sometimes where, sort of wealth has created a lot of opportunity, but also a barrier. People might be
wow.
more inclined to write checks to solve problems, but not personally involved in engaging the mission.
Wow.
Not always right or wrong. There's a balance of all things, of course.
Sure, yeah.
mm,
But it's important to address that. And then what I call the commuter church, or I talk about the church donut, which we see again in established churches a lot, where maybe, 30 years ago, people lived closer to the immediate area of the church, but over time moved into like suburbs or nicer neighborhoods or where the better schools were. And so now, half of your congregation is coming in from sort of outside of your core ministry area.
mm,
And the
Wow.
problem that creates now is, well, that person might invite their neighbor, but that neighbor is not as invested in driving that far to
Right.
come to your church. So all of these things affect your identity as a church in a variety of ways, of course, some positive, some negative, some just in creating circumstances that create plateau or decline. But what's important is taking intentional steps to address them.
interesting.
So, really great points, and, I think any church leader could, see themselves a little bit or see their ministry in some of those descriptions maybe over time. You've experienced different ones, and, only all our listeners today would know kind of what season that they're in as a church or what
Mm,
difficulties they're facing. But, as you're talking through these things, this wasn't in the questions that we prepared, but I'm just kind of curious. y- you know, we have a range of different ministry roles for our listeners that are tuning in today. Who does it fall on to figure out this mission and this and this vision and figuring out all of this identity? Is this something that can only come from the top, or is this something that leaders throughout the ministry are able to pour into? What is your recommendation on that, Tyler?
So I would say some of this is going to depend on your polity, how your denominational decision making is.
Sure.
Certain churches are just organized different.
mm,
So while in some, what like maybe in Baptist circles, for example, it might be top down from the pastor, after kind of hearing from some others. But maybe in a Methodist church, for example, it's a committee of folks that are working
mhm,
on this. So I would say there's not necessarily a right or wrong way because some of those things are predetermined.
Sure.
But I
Yeah.
think in any circumstance, it's important to try to be objective. We all have our own biases and personal preferences and those kinds of things. So we need to be good listeners
Yes.
and try
mm,
to get that outside information. Like, with our process, for example, we use community research as a part of providing that context or of what do people need, who are we best equipped to reach, minister to, and serve, and where's the gap that we need to start bridging as we
Yes.
try to move forward and not just stay where we are.
That
I
makes a
love
lot of
that.
sense. And even as, serving in my own church as being in second chair and beyond roles, not being in that lead pastor role, I think I can speak to say that, it for those of us who are second chair and beyond, it really is our responsibility to really lean into that vision that you do get from that lead pastor or from that committee or wherever it may be, and carry that. I think that's so important, and not kind of run with our own ideas. Maybe I think maybe that's somehow you get into some of those scenarios that you described before, is everyone having their own idea of what it should be, right?
Mm,
Yeah, well, and Kendall, you just mentioned something that I had thought as well is really those people that are in those other roles. It's their job to carry that mission forward. That's if you're not part of the quote
Yeah.
unquote decision making,
Yeah.
what you need to do is own your area then. And how does
Mm,
that mission apply and show up in my ministry
it's
area?
good.
right? So
Mhm.
if you're in comms, how do I remember the mission? How does that mission get repeated?
Very
You
good.
know, if
Yeah,
I'm in children's ministry, how do I make sure this is missionally aligned? Because I think, again, if you're not intentional, we're all just going to slowly drift. It's going to get a little bit
that's
more
right.
blurry. That's human nature,
Mhm.
right? So,
Mhm.
but it's
So
Mhm.
also
good.
easy to think, oh, that's just their job. They say the things from the platform, and I'll just go and do my stuff over
Right.
here. And that's not how that's not how the mission gets achieved. That's not how we make an impact. Is we need to figure out how to contextualize it to our own ministry areas.
It's great advice. I know that a lot of leaders, they confuse mission with methods sometimes. I'm kind of curious, how do you think that churches can distinguish between those two things?
Yeah. So, I mean, mission is timeless. And I think that's sort of where you find some established churches in particular get stuck in doing things they've always
Mm,
done, or honestly, constantly adding, but never removing. Right. And I think the principle of pruning is just wise and even biblical. And so, those methods are something that should be contextual, they should be reevaluated. And we need to, as a church, big C church, even like, learn how to say no, learn how to reassess like, man, this is doing good work, but our mission, vision, our current direction, our current community needs demand us to do something different.
wow.
And
Yeah.
and I think that's where I've seen pastors and church leaders struggle is like we don't want to hurt people's feelings, right? Like we don't want
Yeah.
to say no. But that comes, if you're a leader, you need to lead with that confidence and trust that if this is where God's calling you, then he's also calling you to maybe shut some things down so that you can add some other things to make that lasting legacy impact. Because, if you keep doing what you've always done, you're going to get the same result that you've been getting.
Mm.
And most churches are not growing, they're declining. And so, when we've worked with churches that are further down that road of decline, and I
Right.
have to, go face to face with the church council and say, hey, on a good, if everything stays running well, you've got maybe 10 years left for this church or the door's shut.
Mm,
Mm. Wow.
And that's a hard reality, right?
yeah.
Like,
Mhm.
and our culture is rapidly accelerating past us at the same time that our own problems are causing
Yes.
decline. And
Right.
so that 10 years can become 5 years really fast. Or if you're a small or extremely old church, like elderly population church, it doesn't take but a couple of health crises before you're
Right.
really deciding, man, maybe we need to just shut this down, merge with another church, or find some
Mm.
other way to express and live out our mission. So when it comes to methods, I mean, everything is contextual when we are guiding church leaders, right? Like, this isn't so much about consumerism as it is about being intentional on what the needs are around us. Because when we ignore those, we just get too stuck in our own personal preferences. I mean, you have the worship wars and those kinds of things,
Right.
but what do our people really need in order to reach them effectively?
So, as a chronic people pleaser, that first sentence you made about reevaluating and saying, for our current season, this is no longer working
Yeah.
and hurting people's feelings. When you said that, that was my first thought. And I was like, "Ugh, I wouldn't want to have that conversation. Not it.
Yeah.
But I think as I was listening to you talk, I think it's important to, or I would imagine you're the expert here, Tyler, but I would imagine that you have to build in to your culture, your church culture, checks and balances so that you are maybe quarterly, monthly, however frequently you want to, reevaluating all of that. Like, how much energy are we spending here, and what is the impact being had? And so then it's no longer opinion, right? It's
Right.
no longer like, I don't feel like doing that anymore because it's not working, right? So if you can look at numbers, if you're tracking to those things, I feel like that gives you, it's no longer about hard feelings or opinions. It's really just reevaluating, like, we need to change our methods because our goal, our mission, our identity
Yeah.
is X, Y, and Z.
Yeah.
And this no longer aligns according to the numbers, right?
Right.
And so I think that's important to keep in mind if you're like me and you're like, I don't want to have another boardroom argument about
Right.
why we need to change this. So I don't know. I don't know if you want to speak to that anymore, but I would imagine you kind of have to build that in.
Yeah, I would say I absolutely agree. And so, like anything, there's that balance. You can become too focused on the numbers, right? So
Uh huh.
there is a place for that to be Holy Spirit guided, I guess we could say.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's
Um,
important.
but yeah, I think what's important is as we look at change, and again, when we work with churches that have been stuck doing things the same way for a long time, change, some are more open to change as the
Right.
congregations are than others. Um, but I think what's important to focus on is how do we adapt that purpose or that principle in a new expression. So it's not that, like the knitting ministry is bad. I don't know, I'm just coming up with an example. But it's like, what did the knitting ministry achieve for those people that participated in it? And how can
Mm.
we bring them along into the new iteration that might not be knitting, but sort of still meet that need of maybe it was community, or maybe it was
Maybe
just
it's
having,
hammer throwing.
just other
Maybe you
people, a
just
consistent place to show up and engage, and make a difference for somebody outside of the community or something. So
Mhm.
look at how that can be expressed differently and have those conversations. Like, I think people want to know that we care, that we're thinking about them, even if we're moving in a different direction. We don't want them to feel left behind. So how do we
100%.
communicate and cast new vision that doesn't leave them behind, but includes them?
Yeah. Love that.
And I even think about, it's such an important thing for every area of your ministry, and you spoke to this a little bit, is, you've got to know where you're going and like what your mission is, who you are in that season to try to figure out what to say yes to and what to say no to. Because, maybe it is the knitting group or, whatever random small group or, thing pops up in that season. And I think every ministry leader can speak to that, the random ideas that come in from different folks. And you've got to be able, when you know who you are and where you're headed, um, whether that's for the church as a whole or even for a specific ministry, it makes it easier to say no to some things and yes to other
Mm.
things. It's your best yes when you know that it's going to help fulfill where you feel like God is taking you in that season. And so,
Mhm.
um, I love the points that you brought up here, Tyler. I know that you have. We had a whole podcast episode on this, talking about reaching the right people, and you've spoken to this before. That's again another plug to go check out that previous episode because it was so good. But reaching the right people with the right methods, how does a church figure this out? How can you be successful in this?
Yeah. So we obviously use community research. There's a process that we've honed and developed over 7 years of doing this in church ministry, but even prior to that, having experience in the corporate world using this for nonprofits and car dealerships and all kinds of things. But it's ultimately understanding what makes the people tick that you're best equipped to reach, minister to, and serve.
Hmm.
Mm.
Some churches feel like, no, we have to reach everybody and all this kind of stuff. And while well intended, I think it's really rooted in an oversimplification of who we
Mm.
reach and why we reach them. We sometimes see this as like, like, oh, well, I don't want to exclude, other racial groups. Like, we're not saying we're a white church, they're a black church. Like, there's other reasons why people are here, right? Like, what's the
Yeah.
culture behind, what's the lifestyle behind all of those things that we see? I mean, I often use the illustration of you might go to the grocery store and see two Mercedes parked next to each other, but you have no idea who paid for that thing cash in full and who's struggling to make the payments and robbing Peter to pay Paul, right? But our human nature just makes us judge the book by the cover. Like, oh, well,
Yeah.
everybody's rich here. They're driving Mercedes, right?
Right.
And so, and I unpack this more in that episode 111. Again, I'm just gonna and I use the 5 Ps for those that aren't maybe in a place to invest in a research solution or get some guided thing, but the 5 Ps of target audience really can help as a good starting point. And so those are people, which is kind of like that baseline demographic. Maybe some of those things like age and income and stuff that you more commonly start
Yes.
with, but also where most people stop. But place, another one, geography. Where do they come from? I can't tell you how many times I've talked to pastors and asked them to describe like their target audience, and they never mention geography. Like where they, like, are they five
Wow.
minutes or
Yeah.
5 hours away?
Yeah.
Like it seems so silly, but if we're going to be intentional in reaching our community or advertising to our community or being
Yes.
in community events where these people live, we need to answer that question. Um, what are their passions? What are they passionate about? What are they interested in? Their pain points. What are they struggling with? And what are their pursuits? That's the last of the 5 Ps, their aspirations. So when you start to sort of answer these questions, they
Yes.
paint a picture of who your church is naturally best equipped to reach, minister to, and serve. Because again, you can't serve everyone at 100% capacity. So like if we were to
Right.
put blinders on and focus, if we could copy and paste sort of that person that we know, like, man, if they got here, we could really help them grow in their walk with Jesus, what does that person look like? What are the struggles that you're able to answer because of the strengths that God's put into your church body already?
Yes. Words that come to mind for me are being intentional,
Yeah.
right? Like this brings a level of intentionality that can really take you far, and also the word influence comes to mind too because every community is different, right? And like I feel
Mm.
like the pastors and the ministry leaders that I see doing so well, they have a rapport with the people around them in that community. They are serving in those communities. They have a presence in those communities. And so I feel like leaning into the people that are actually around your ministry and what that community needs and those things, it just goes so far. And I'm remembering some of those elements that we talked about in that last episode. It makes so much sense. And I love that you pointed out that of course, like you want everyone to be welcome at your church, but you can be intentional to try to lean into who you are as a church family. And so I think there's something special about that. If you
Mhm.
figure out, and go ahead, I don't want to
So one of
interrupt
the
you.
one of the things that I tell people is, again, this is not about trying to attract the superficially similar, right?
Oh, sure.
It's about we want people that are bought into the mission, and what that looks like
Mhm.
is a
Wow.
whole rainbow of colors and backgrounds and lifestyles, because there's deeper
Yes.
issues that are drawing them, or deeper
Mm,
priorities that are drawing them into our culture that get them to stick. And so
yes.
that's
Mm.
where we get the singular focus, is we want people that are bought into our mission. Like that, I think that's an easier sell than
Yeah.
sometimes with church leaders. And so we need to know what do those people look like? How do they live? What are they struggling with? And so on.
Tyler, you said issues and then you kind of paused and said priorities. And I don't know if you were correcting yourself, but I think both are so true. I think
Mm,
that's a good call out. I think that, you're either drawn to a church because you want healing. And I think everybody can kind of hold both of those
yes.
either in tandem equally or more one the other in
Yeah.
in its different seasons. But just wanted to call that out. I think both are good. I think
Yes, yeah,
use both.
absolutely. Well, I switched. My family switched churches 4 years ago, and it was the first time we've
Mm,
ever done it with kids, and so it was like super intimidating. And so sometimes when I talk
Yes.
about this, I even share my own experience. Like my
yeah.
wife and I were like, "Man, church shopping was hard when it was just the two of us." And now we have to figure it out with kids in tow and
Oh
kids
yeah.
ministry. Like there's all these
Yes.
other
Yeah.
layers that we didn't have to think about or
Yes.
deal with before.
That's right.
And God just blessed us by the first church we went to. We were like, this is the church. I mean, so like we didn't even have to
Mm,
go experience others. We just knew. But part of why we knew is because the church that we are now members of is they were so clear about their identity. They were
Mm,
so
yeah.
clear about their purpose and their passions and their goals. I mean, it's literally woven in every single week. You can't show up to church one week and not hear about it. And
Yep.
that intentionality allowed me to
yes.
recognize this is where God wanted us. Like we knew what we were looking for, but if that was a secret, or if it was left to a brochure that I would get at a connect table somewhere, like who knows what would have happened,
Yes.
right? And so that's part of like building that culture and weaving it in through every area where people just can't miss it.
Mhm. It's good.
I love that because, a lot of ministries, they probably have somewhat figured out who they are, like who their identity is as a church, but they may not have been able to put words to it before, or maybe have never thought about it in a way that is tangible enough to be able to explain it to other people. And then it can even be more difficult when you don't have those words, when you don't have a way to communicate that to get people to buy into that mission of where you're trying to take this thing. I'm just kind of curious, Tyler, what would you say? What's your approach to in developing that vision that can be authentic to who a church is, who a ministry is, and trying to be relevant to the community that's around them?
Yeah. So when we work with churches to cast a new vision, we call it a contagious vision, because you want one that actually
Love
catches on
that.
with folks.
Yeah. Yeah.
We kind of work through three pillars, and the first one is, this is not going to be a shocker, but your people, right? Like who are the folks we're
Mhm.
trying to
Yeah.
reach in sharing as we share this. Third pillar is your plan, which is really kind of your strategy. And so
Yeah.
as we walk through prompts, and if somebody's naturally a visionary, like there's sort of like that God-given, like, I see this
Yeah.
opportunity, and it's more about how we communicate it. But we've worked with churches that are more, committee driven, or maybe they're absent a pastor at that time, but they need to determine a step forward. and they don't have a visionary strength naturally. And so for them, it becomes more of like, well, how can we prompt them through thinking through a variety of things that the strategy turns into a vision over
Yes.
time. And then that third pillar is your positioning, and that's that communication, because a good plan rises and falls on communication, right? Like if people don't
Mm.
understand it and they don't understand why it matters to them and why it matters in
Yeah.
the grand scheme of life, it doesn't get bought into, it doesn't get picked up. No, the needle doesn't move.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so walking through how we specifically communicate these things in different ways, and how do we support the just pure communication with a strong culture, and we have a whole framework for that as well. So that the overall story is, again, like I mentioned a minute ago, like just can't be missed.
Mhm.
What are those? I mean, are there any quick tips that you can tell us to helping to make that vision, that mission, contagious? Like is it putting it on the wall? Like is it talking about it from stage? Like any quick tips on that?
Um, uh, Putting it on the wall is fine. I think that can be, becomes white noise over time, right? So I do
Sure. Yeah.
encourage um, reminding folks with your language from the stage.
Mm,
Yeah.
You don't have to sort of cast vision every week, but you can say, as a church that prioritizes XYZ, or like
yes.
Yeah.
we want to do this in the next 3 years. Like just weave it in however you can. I think is a super
Yeah. I like that.
practical step, but it's being consistent, right? Similar to like, I don't know, churches that are um, plateaued and want to grow. Maybe they've gotten out of the habit of acknowledging guests. They don't have this culture of being
Mm,
expectant of guests, so they don't talk about a connect card from the stage anymore,
right.
or
Mm.
something like that. And it's like you've got to get used to doing these things, even if you don't see that immediate result. Like even if you look and you see you don't, there's no new people here. I guess I can skip the guest, language today. Like, no,
Yeah.
be expectant. Set the
Yes.
Mm.
culture.
It's
Like
good.
Yes.
we want people here, so this is how we're going to act and behave, and it's going to be normal rather than scramble last minute. So
Mhm.
similarly, trying to weave that into your everyday experiences. But when we build work on building culture, we really look at three areas: like the words you speak, the actions you take, and the
Mm,
relationships you foster. So words you speak is often the easiest thing, right? To incorporate,
yes.
like what is the language we're going to be using, but what are the things we're going to be doing, and who, what are those relationships that we're going to help support and build towards this goal. So like, again, if you want to plan a church, like, well, how are we getting people involved in the community in another area, or how are we showing
Mhm.
up in that other community and building
Yes.
relationships beyond just a one-time sort of event.
I love that. And, words are so powerful. Our lead pastor, he always says that words build worlds,
Yep.
and that it's the kind of thing where you've got that culture, the words that you say really matter. And I even think, something that I have tried to do not only in our church, but in our home with my kids is I will
Mm.
often include the why in when I'm explaining anything. Oh, not
Yeah.
why are we putting our phones away at the dinner table? We do that
Mm.
because a value of our family is that we're going to spend quality time together, right?
Yeah,
Same thing in a
absolutely.
church context, right? Like we want to be on mission to reach our city. So that's why
Mm.
we're doing this upcoming event, right? Like
Yep.
that's
Yep.
how you speak about it, I feel like is so important, and it's just like a easy way to remind people, right?
Yeah. Why should they care? That's
Why
always the
should
the big
Oh,
thing.
that's
Mm.
Yeah.
good. Yeah. Yeah. I feel like knowing who you are as a church, having that identity, having that mission it's just going to keep becoming more and more important because we're in a noisy world, right? I'm
Yeah.
just curious, is there any current trends that you have seen or anything that you would say is going to be just even more important over the next 5 or 10 years on this thing?
So I think looking 10 years down the road it is impossible in this day and age. But 5 years, I mean, you cannot wait for clarity. I think that's the big thing that I want to
Mm,
get across is our churches in America are already struggling. We are accelerating
mm,
Mm.
faster and faster in a post-Christian culture.
wow.
And so your mission and why you matter and what difference you're making in the world is gonna be more critical than ever. And we've got a young generation coming up that never learned, the basics of Christianity, the things that are just kind of innately to familiar to many of us, even if you didn't grow up in
Yeah.
church. And
Right.
so it's going to require a significant shift from ministry leaders to adapt to that. This is a great opportunity for church planting and sort of starting over,
Yes.
but
Yes.
um, but being aware that there's people that just have no clue, and it's not that they are rejecting the gospel, it's just they have no starting point anymore, and all they hear is
Right.
maybe what they see on TV or social media.
Yeah.
Mm.
And so it's really, when that baseline is shifted, we have to adapt our ministry. So you can look ahead to, like, maybe England or parts of Europe if you wanna figure out what it
Yeah.
might look like
Yeah.
5, 10 years from now. That's
Yeah.
often, sort of, how we can get a peek into, what the American church might look like, and,
Wow.
it's gonna require us to be much more intentional about our identity and be real and be authentic and as consistent as we can be as humans.
Wow.
And I tell you what I'm hearing is, it's becoming more and more important for us as churches to figure out who we are, right? To
Mm.
have that mission down pat so that we, because there's so much information that's being thrown at everyone, right? Like there's so much information you get just from how often you scroll on your phone. People who come into your ministry, they need us as church leaders to know who we are, know what God's called us to, and to be able to put those things forward for our community.
Yeah,
I think too, uh, unfortunately, the real fundamental parts of church and Jesus and scripture are pretty countercultural right now.
yeah,
And so not only is it more difficult for churches to kind of identify like which direction do we run? First of all, the harvest is plenty. I mean,
Yes.
there's people that want and need Jesus so badly. It's a very confusing time. But also, if you want to kind of hone in, identify who you're ministering to, right? It's also takes a new level of boldness to stick to those guns and not, you know, receive feedback from the outside and say, okay, maybe we didn't mean to offend anybody. Let's, kind of revisit our mission. And so that's sad, but I think that's the reality right now.
yeah. Well, and I think it's gonna require us to adapt ministry even more broadly, right? Like Sunday
Hmm.
morning in a church building is probably not going to be how we reach many people in the next 5 to 10 years, right? So, like, how do we get out of those buildings? How do we get into the community? How do we get into small groups or
Yeah.
common areas, like common locations in our communities, to engage them? I think it's going to look very different. But the leaders that are willing to embrace doing something different, I think you're going to see the fruit of those efforts if God's calling them to it, right? Like not everybody's called to do the
Mm-hmm.
same things.
Sure. Tyler, I'm just curious, for a listener today who's feeling stuck, they're not sure really, about their church's identity. They're not sure about the mission. What encouragement would you give them, or just practical advice?
Yeah. So I would say start small. A lot of times it's not that their mission isn't clear or their vision isn't clear or their core values aren't clear. It's they haven't figured out how or thought of where that needs to show up and how that needs to show up. Right. So start small. Like everything is just about like that 1% win every day. It's not about, completely flipping everything upside down.
Mm-hmm.
This is a simple exercise that the African church plant that I mentioned at the beginning of the podcast. We went through this sort of at the end of our day. We had worked on messaging, how to communicate their story to their community. And so the simple test was really this. People are scanners, right? So like when we go on a website, like they're not reading every word. They're kind of just, trying to get the gist of things. So I pulled up this church's website and I read every headline on the homepage. And I was like, "What does that tell me? About your church?" And they were kinda like, "Nothing." I was like, it sounds like I'm reading a brochure or maybe a menu, right? Like, it's like our services, our
Yeah.
this, like, your story's not being told. And so
Wow.
just stopping and pausing and maybe having someone else do it for you and just close your eyes and just focus on just the words that they're reading of those main headlines can just be that aha moment, right? Because like,
Yes.
while a personal invitation is the still the leading reason why people show up at a church, they're all gonna visit your website. So
Yep.
that's a practical place to start that doesn't require you have to be a coder or WordPress developer or whatever. Like, how do we have more intentional words that reflect our mission? And
Mm,
that doesn't mean just, put the mission statement on there, but how does it
yes.
show up
Right.
in these other areas?
It's
So
good.
good. That is great advice. And we're obviously passionate about the website side. We work with a lot of churches that are getting their website right, and I know that you do too. And
Mm.
that language matters. We've talked about that a lot on this episode, so that's
Yeah.
that's so good. Tyler, you know, you've answered this question before. We always like to talk about healthy churches on our show. And I'm just curious, you know, from your perspective, from your lane, what would you say these days is an essential component of a healthy church?
Clarity on their message and who they are. I mean, that seems like
Yeah.
it should be
It's good.
obvious given this podcast, but I think it is just vital. Because the reality is if you're not clear on that, you're going to invite other things into that conversation, so to speak. And that's
Yes.
not always healthy. We've not put guardrails on who we are, why we're here. And so when you get a bunch of people in a room, things are going to get a little haywire without those guardrails. And so clarity is really your best friend, um, in that arena, as it's got to be baked into every sort of touch point, to reinforce
That's
it
a
as
great
well.
point.
And I think, I've been part of a church, for example, that um, led with sort of be willing to change for the sake of others. Like,
Mm.
it might have reached a tipping point at a time or two where it's like, okay, are we just like changing things constantly to like, but it created like a reminder and a culture of like, this isn't about me. So like, yeah, I have
Mm,
Mm.
preferences and this is annoying, but I'm bought into the bigger mission. And so they've created this
wow.
culture of like being willing to be flexible.
Mm,
And so I think, just having that clarity can significantly impact the health of your church because you're attracting people that believe in that. Whether they're all the way there or
yeah.
not is a whole other conversation, but um, they're going to be drawn to that. They're going to respect that. And honestly, the ones that maybe want to cause some trouble, be a little bit more toxic in the situation, are going to be turned away from it. Right. So I think
Right.
to
Right.
be healthy, you have to have guidelines and guardrails.
That's
Love
really
it.
good. Well, you know, we like to end with a final five, kind of a rapid fire round. Are you up for the challenge to go through these again?
Oh, let's see what we can come up with.
Okay. Here we go. What's one book on this subject or similar you'd recommend to church leaders?
So I think this one came out not that long ago, a couple of months ago, maybe. Future Focused Church by Kara Powell and a couple other folks, same folks that or a couple of the same folks that wrote Growing Young, out of the Fuller Youth Institute and such. Incredible resource, super practical. And again, we're talking about the future. What does the church look like 5, 10 years from now?
Yeah,
That's a great place to start. Focused Church.
good one. Okay. What's the last thing you listened to on Spotify or Apple Music? And you have to be honest.
Well, my honest answer is I've been so busy with consultations and writing lately, I have not listened to anything other than my drive
Oh,
back and forth. Just radio stuff. So nothing interesting this time around, unfortunately.
okay. Okay. That's fair. Favorite piece of technology or software right now?
So I've been playing around with Lovable .dev or whatever, like for vibe coding, which has been really
Oh,
fun. So
okay.
we do a lot of assessments and tools and things. So it's like, and I used to be heavy into like spreadsheets and writing ridiculous formulas back in the day. So like this is like a new iteration for me to explore how to be creative and help our processes, make them more attainable and accessible for church leaders even, or just to make life easier for for us. So I've been vibe coding some tools as far as that's concerned.
That's really nice for you. That sounds like a tool that I probably wouldn't like very much. I don't like spreadsheets or
Well, it's not
coding.
it's just literally it's AI driven, right? So you're chatting, you're like, hey, build,
Okay.
it could be
Oh,
like build
okay.
me a landing page for this, or it could be
Oh,
build a quiz
okay.
assessment. Like it's really, yeah, it's very natural in how it flows. But
Okay.
yeah, I've
Maybe I
been
would
able to
like
do
that.
things that I haven't found paid tools otherwise that have already been
Wow.
able to do the things I needed it to do.
Dang, that's so crazy. I feel
Yeah.
like at anytime somebody talks about an AI tool that they're using, it's like this thing does something that all the other ones don't, and I feel like it's all evolving so fast. I've watched too many robot movies in my childhood. We all know where this leads. Okay, quote or advice that has stuck with you over the years.
Yeah, so I think how's it? Maya Angelou, I think, was attributed to this one. And it was like, I've learned that people will forget what you said,
Mm,
forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel.
Mm,
love that one.
And I
Love that
mean,
one.
it's I think especially in the church space, it's such a powerful
Yeah,
reminder
it
of
is.
how are we being intentional? Because if that's the thing they're gonna walk away
Mm,
with, you might have had like
yes.
an amazing theologically sound sermon, but how did you make them feel? Like, how did
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
experience overall, from website to parking lot to children's ministry and back out and guest follow-up, how did you make them feel?
I
Because
love
that's the thing
that.
that sticks. How many of us think back to, like, that person that said something to us, we were in middle school or high school or whatever, like, for better or worse, right? Like, it's just
Yeah.
so true. And so
Yes.
being mindful that that's gonna be the takeaway,
Mhm.
how do we approach things?
It's
I love
good.
it. One thing you'd like to communicate to our audience of church leaders.
You're probably closer to a breakthrough than you think, right? Like, I think
Mhm.
it's
Love
easy
it.
to feel like, man, our church is, on a path that we can't correct. It's gonna require too much time, energy, and money. And I would argue that it just requires focus
Mm.
and simplicity and practical steps. Um, and on that note, if I can do a little shameless plug.
Sure. Go for it.
That's where we're going next anyway. Take us there, Tyler.
Cool. All right. Well, if you go to firmfoundationsmarketing.com/breakthrough, we actually have a 90-minute call that we'll hop on with you, really kind of walk you through several areas of your ministry and really assess what are your three biggest barriers to growth, and give you a one-page action plan that we email over afterwards.
Wow.
Because
Amazing.
nobody needs a plan that's just going to overwhelm you and depress you, right?
Right.
Like, you need something that can, and I've experienced this myself, having hired consultants and, a variety of
Mm.
services. It's like, the big laundry list of things does not make me feel excited to move forward. It's the, what's my
Yes.
step today? What's my next week?
Yeah.
What's my 1 month? Right. And then that's how you make progress, is getting those quick, immediate wins, those practical things that you can execute. And that's just who I am as a person, is like, yeah, there's a lot of things you can do, but let's focus on, like, how do we contextualize for you and what your best step that is, not
Right.
like copying and pasting from some other church. So, yeah,
That's so good.
firmfoundationsmarketing.com/breakthrough. If somebody's interested in checking that out, learning more, be a great place to
Awesome.
go.
What a specifically tangible, practical thing. A lot of church leaders, pastors specifically, like head pastors, are visionaries, right?
Yeah.
And so they're not always great at identifying, like, I know exactly where we want to go.
Yeah.
How do we
Right.
get there? And it feels like
Right.
that's exactly what that is. What a gift that is.
Yeah. Yeah. So we're excited. That's something we launched fairly recently. So again, great timing on the podcast to be able to share that with others. I mean, it's incredibly affordable. It's not thousands of dollars or something. So hopefully that can help somebody. It's 90 minutes of your time. We have a great conversation that's very intentional for identifying those top three and then what to do about it. Like, nobody just wants to know what problems are. They want to know what the solutions are.
Very cool. Tyler, thank you so much for joining us today and talking us through this. I know that's been super helpful for all of our listeners, and I just love the chance to connect with you again. So thank you again for being on here with us.
Well, thank you so much for having me. It really is a blessing and an honor to be invited back. So thank you. It's been a great conversation.
Awesome. And Jess, thank you too for being on here with us. And to all of our listeners today, I just want to remind you, we're going to link up all of those links in the show notes so that you can get access to everything you need, from his book recommendations to the link to his website and all these different things. And I would just ask,
Episode 111.
episode 111, that's right. Definitely go back and check out that one if you haven't not already. And I would just say to all of our listeners today, if this episode has encouraged you, if you've pulled any nugget of wisdom out of this, would you consider sharing it with a friend? We just want to get this into the as many ears of church leaders as we can, and it really just goes a long way to help us in equipping other church leaders just like you. And so it makes a big difference. Again, hit that follow or subscribe button wherever you're enjoying our show. Leave us a review. We love reading those and how you're enjoying all of the conversations that we're having. But until next time, I would just encourage all of you, just keep leading well right there in your city. Thank you again to Tyler and to Jess. And we'll see all of you right back here next week on Church Leadership Lab.
This episode of the Church Leadership Lab podcast is brought to you by Ministry Brands, the largest provider of church technology software. Over 90,000 churches rely on Ministry Brands for their single platform solution that brings together all the digital tools a church needs. From online giving to websites to church management software and more, Ministry Brands is leading the way in simple-to-use, innovative solutions, all with the goal of empowering healthy churches. To learn more, visit ministrybrands.com.